and welcome to the Asking Autistics podcast. I am Lindsey Brains and Spoons.
And I am the happy stimmer. Right, my name is Rebecca.
And today we're joined by our friend Jamie. Jamie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Jamie Roberts. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California, a neurodivergent therapist on all social media platforms. And I have a group practice that specializes in neuroqueer youth. And I also do ADHD and autism assessments for adults. And I also do trainings with my company NeuroPebble on teaching other clinicians how to do assessments.
That is so necessary. I love that.
Yes, it's been a really fun process just doing the assessments and then also getting to share that information with other clinicians to make it more accessible for everyone.
I especially that's just so necessary because when I was being assessed for autism, when I was a teenager, there were only 4 people in the entire California area in Southern California who could actually diagnose autism, which is why the process took so long. It took over a year, almost 2 years for me to get diagnosed. But the fact that you're doing that makes it more accessible because now more people, they don't have to wait as long because there's not as few people. I love that.
Yes, absolutely. We're filling a hole because a lot of adults, assessments aren't covered on their insurance. So if you don't need a full neuropsych evaluation and you want something more than a self-diagnosis, what's in between? And I think that's where master clinicians can step in and provide a thorough diagnostic process and give that clarity, give that information. Because if we're not needing school accommodations, if we're not needing to apply for state disability, we don't need a full neuropsych as adults. And so being able to fit that gap in the middle, so it's not a year-long plus wait.
I love that.
That's actually how I got my autism assessment, was working with my therapist was we can just do it. Since I didn't need it to put it on any paperwork. And so, yeah, they're are you self-diagnosed? Or are you clinically diagnosed? And I was I'm that weird third thing where I went through the assessment with a professional. Yeah, I was where I've gone through the assessment process, but I don't have any papers.
Yeah, I and then I went to my psychiatrist and I was so this is what I'm thinking. And he was yeah, that makes sense. And then just checked a box. I was okay, cool.
I was in such denial when I got my diagnosis because I was, 15 years old and I didn't want to be known as the kid with what was called at the time Asperger's, but is now autism spectrum disorder, usually around level 1 support needs. But I was in such denial that in my assessment, I told my doctor, I was I'm not autistic. And he goes, look me in the eye. And I was just you won, sir.
Dang it. Well, that's the thing, though, is it took your family years for you to actually get a real assessment and get diagnosed. And then, for so many of us who either recently have been diagnosed or are still seeking a diagnosis as adults, it's so important to have the information out there because I worked in special education. I was working in disability services specifically with autistic students and clients. I have different certifications at different points in time that said I was an autism specialist. And I had only seen it in little boys, in small children. That was it. And so honestly, being on social media and seeing you and meeting other autistic women, adults, autistic folks, was a huge game changer for me. Somebody who supposedly knew all of this about autism, but nobody was, even now, most trainings are still focused on children and specifically boys.
Which is, again, why I love that you're doing it. You're doing it from the adult perspective, Jamie. That is so necessary, especially also because, like you mentioned, the cost barrier is so high.
Absolutely.
I've heard of people spending over $3,000 not covered by insurance just to get assessed. And and as we know, a lot of assessors still have a bias against autistic women and will diagnose them with literally anything other than autism. And so they're like wasting $3,000 on a diagnosis that they didn't get.
Yeah.
And it's
I've
like,
read reports where it's like, well, they list like 5 different things that are autistic, like, but they didn't make eye contact, but they didn't do this. And so they're not autistic. And it's like, but you just wrote this whole paragraph about everything that like points to them being autistic, but they didn't like cross that threshold into what that specific provider thought was enough.
Yeah.
Well, and especially
it's so bad.
Especially as adults, people are typically, if you've gone that long without a diagnosis, then you are high masking. And you have learned a lot of coping strategies and a lot of methods on how to be human, how to act normal in social situations. So even during an assessment, it's almost ingrained in us to like fake eye contact and do those types of things because you've had 30, 40 plus years of practice at these things, forcing yourself to do these things. So yeah.
That's one of the key things that I teach in my trainings for clinicians is how to ask those questions, that if we're only basing it on different rating scales, we're going to miss some of those high maskers. But asking questions that are like, how do you make eye contact? And what is it like for you when you make eye contact? So asking the questions of describing the experience as opposed to can you or do you? Like getting out of the house on time. How do you get out of the house on time? Not just are you able to?
One of the ways I used to fake eye contact was I would look at like the corners of people's eyes, which usually made them think I was looking them in the eye. I mean, like they always kind of knew something was off, but I was looking at the corner of their eyes so that I wouldn't actually have to look into their eyeballs. And I also
just look anywhere in the forehead. It's usually
well, the nice thing about phones is I can just be that annoying person on my phone and not have to make eye contact now. Like I mask that by just looking at my phone, or I just stare straight ahead and people think I'm just being dramatic.
Yeah. I've heard people say like they'll look at the thing right behind your head, they'll read lips, they'll look at the forehead. Like people will like, I'll watch you while you're talking, but when I'm talking, I look away, or like I count for 3 seconds. And so when you ask the questions in a certain way, you find out what the system is, right?
Oh my God.
What is the pattern? What is the system? How are you doing?
The 3 seconds thing is literally how I understand when I've made something awkward in social situations. That's the math my brain does. If somebody takes longer than 3 seconds to respond to what I've said, I know that I've either made things awkward or I've said the wrong thing and they're trying to process what it is that I've said. So that's usually when I'm like, sorry, did I make things awkward? And like sometimes it's just that like they're on delayed processing, which like my partner does that all the time. Like he's just like, no, I had to think about what you said. But like, yeah, I always literally count 3 seconds in my brain because if they're not responding immediately, it means that I've changed something in the dynamic.
So when we talk about autism assessments, can we like explain that to folks who haven't been through the process? What are the types of tests and things that go into an autism assessment?
Like all the varieties of assessments that people can do, the assessments that I'm doing?
Sure.
I mean, there's a neuropsychological evaluation that's going to be a full battery. It's also going to look at like processing, learning disabilities, other cognitive things. It's going to be very, very thorough and many, many hours and many, many thousands. I still recommend that for teens and younger because there's still so much being developed in the brain that we want to make sure everything is ruled out and catch that. So I do still recommend that for minors. And then like outside of that, there are some other standardized ones. There's like the MIGDAS, the ADOS. There's just being able to do a really full. I'm sorry, my cat is super just distracted me and I lost my train of thought. There's different types of like structured interviews.
So I have a question when it comes to autism assessments. So one of the things about autism, for those who don't know, is that autism is a neurodevelopmental disability, which means that autism symptoms typically present before or around 4 years old for most children. Some can show symptoms as early as like 6 months. I know I did. My question with that is because when you're going through an assessment, you have to try and assess, to my understanding, you have to try and assess the childhood symptoms to see whether or not this is autism or whether or not it's some sort of other disability that has similar symptoms. Do you find it easier to do that with young adults and children, since their parents are able to tell you what developmental milestones they've missed, versus adults who might not remember their childhood enough to give those answers?
I think when I'm looking at developmental milestones, then yes, having the parents' input is very helpful to have that outside perspective, because like you're not going to remember at 4 years old when you started walking or what you started doing. But I do think like with adults or like 30s, 40s, as opposed to even like early 20s, there's a bigger level of like reflection of being able to find some of those patterns, or how a lot of us have said, I just thought those were quirky traits of me. I've always been somebody who did this. Like, know that I started reading early, or like, I know my mom told me I was reading at a really, really young age before even getting to kindergarten. And so I think adults have done some of that seeking out of the information from their parents, or looking back on what has been consistent for them throughout time. But definitely when working with younger people, getting some of that parent perspective is helpful.
The only reason I ask is because I know a lot of people seeking professional diagnosis hear about that and they find it really like an intimidating barrier if they maybe don't have a good relationship with their parents. And also for many who have that experience, that leads to a certain level of trauma that makes it difficult to understand or reflect on a childhood they may not remember.
Yeah, I think it comes back to, it's most important to me what your internal experience is. If we have somebody who's observing it from the outside, right? Like being a high masker, I was great to have in class. I answered all the questions, like that wasn't noticed, but my internal experience, right? I was incredibly anxious and I was like counting everything. And so like my parents observing me wouldn't have known those things. And so it is helpful to have an outside observer contribute. But for me, it's not necessary, because it's more important for me to know what was happening for you internally, or your thought process, or how you interpreted a situation. And that's going to have a higher value. And maybe we don't have like a specific memory or example of that one time when I was 5 years old, but it can be like an essence of a feeling. Like I know in that kindergarten year, I really was anxious all the time. I'm not really sure why, but I know that I was. Right. And so like, to me, that has enough value.
That's really good.
That.
Okay. So going back to the different diagnostic tools that people use for like standardized assessments for autism, we mentioned the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, the ADOS. And then there's also the Autism Diagnostic Interview, revised, the ADIR. The MCHATs use, that's for kids. And a lot of people are taking like online assessments, a lot of adults, especially like if they are trying to self-diagnose or like seek an assessment down the road. And I feel like some are better than others. Like what are your preferences? What are your takes on the different
I know there's
tools?
been new research that came out this year that the RADS-R is actually quite accurate in assessing. So I do still incorporate the RADS-R. I use like everything on Embrace Autism. I use those as kind of like data points. And also the CAT-Q, which is the camouflaging autistic traits.
Yeah, the CAT-Q
is really important. And I think the monotropism questionnaire is also, that's the one where most clients have come in and be like, I took that and I didn't realize I did that. Or like, oh my God, that spoke to me so much more than anything else. And so I think that those are good primers to have people thinking about those questions, or looking at things in a new light, or like, oh, I read this so that I paid attention to it in my life after that.
I've had several other people, and especially folks that are in the therapy world, that had a similar experience to me, where with the RADS-R, the wording is terrible.
Absolutely.
And so just know that, like, and especially if you come from an educational world, if you come from the psychology background, you might end up picking it apart and realizing, like, I know what answer you want, like I know what you're looking for, but this is so worded poorly, and like, or this is 3 questions in one and I can't answer it appropriately.
And yet that adds to my diagnosis. If you come in and say, I hated it because of this, the questions were too like broad, or they didn't allow for this, right? Like, and you had a negative experience with it, that's something I'm going to take into account, right? Because
autistic people often struggle with questions like that. You know, like everyone does, but autistic people struggle to a different degree of understanding extremely nuanced and complicated questions.
Or just things that are too broad. I think that's what drives us nuts, is we're like, no, this is just, I can't pick just one thing, you guys.
Right. And that's why I think that the clinical interview is so much more important than the standardized test. Right? Because the clinical interview is where you get the stories, where you get the background, where you get the systems, where they describe it. The standardized test can help set us up for that. But I don't think that those are a defining feature.
I know that what I use these tests for, because I've taken them occasionally, even though I already have a professional diagnosis. I find some of these tests really helpful in explaining to non-autistic people how my autism affects me. Like, for example, I don't know which one it is because I don't remember the name of it, but the one that shows your symptoms in like a wheel, like a color wheel with your symptoms like shown how severe they are. That's how I explain the autism spectrum to people, because it's one of the easiest ways to explain that autism is not from less autistic to more autistic. It is all of these symptoms put together that vary in severity from autistic person to autistic person. And it helps me to explain what lower support needs looks like, what moderate support needs looks like, and what high support needs looks like.
Yeah, I love when there's a vision and you can see where everything lands. That makes it so much easier to take in the information.
So when you're doing an autism assessment with an adult, what is your process? What should people expect, or what's, something to give us an idea of what that might look like?
Yeah. So the process is I send out the rating scales ahead of time so they can do that on Embrace. I also do the sensory profile, so we have a really good idea of what somebody's sensory experience is. And we're usually also assessing for ADHD at the same time. So there's a couple rating scales for that.
Why?
Right? If we're going to do one,
it's like wherever, right? Like it's wherever autism goes, like ADHD is like, hey, don't leave me behind. They're they're the best friends, and one of them is always in charge and the other is always trying to just drag itself along with them.
Yeah. So I don't do just autism or just ADHD. If you're coming to me, we're going to assess for both, and we'll rule one out, or we'll identify both, and that's what it'll be. So those will be sent out ahead of time. Then the person will send all the reports back. Then we'll have a 90-minute to 2-hour clinical interview where we'll go over all the information. We'll do all the questioning. I've been working on this interview style for over 10 years. I've trained in a psychiatry practice that specialized in ADHD and autism in adolescents. And I've been doing those assessments for 10 years. And then I brought that to my private practice. So we go through all of that. Then in between our first session and our feedback session, so it's just 2 sessions, you're going to send me any extra thoughts you have, or you know what, I'm going to ask mom about that thing. Send me any notes in between. I'm going to write the report to 80%. And then in our second session, we're going to go through the report together so that the client feels that it absolutely represents them and their experience. So if I misinterpreted something, or if I quoted it wrong, or if I forgot to ask about something, we can fill that all in together so they feel that it is an accurate representation of themselves. And then we'll finalize the diagnosis and resources.
Do you feel, because I know Lindsey was talking earlier about when assessing these questions, I know what answer you're looking for. Well, do you feel that helps counteract that? Helps with it? Do you feel that that at-home assessment and describing your feelings and everything, do you feel that helps get a more authentic of not just doing what they think they need to say in order to get that assessment, but instead just actually going through what they feel?
Yeah, I think by doing both, and if they both match, if the at-home assessments match what I noticed in the clinical interview, then that's extra confirmation. If there's a big discrepancy between the two, then I'm going to ask more questions about like, oh, you scored much lower on this than I anticipated based on what we talked about. And that's happened with the sensory profile, where they've described like being really sensory seeking, but when we did the assessment, sensory seeking was extra low. And so we'll kind of like check in on what that might be, and we'll look at that together to see where the differences in answers or experiences might have shown up.
That's really good. I like how thorough, and the fact that you've been doing this for 10 years is like so awesome. Because again, this in a lot of states, in a lot of cities, if you are seeking an adult assessment, whether it's for autism or ADHD or any number of things, like we said, it's really hard to find someone that assesses adults. I mean, in my experience, it is predominantly like if you can find somebody, they specialize in children, that's what they are looking at. And so I think that's part of the reason we're seeing this dialogue happening. We're seeing, videos being made about self-assessments and self-diagnosis, as people are calling it, is just because of the lack of resources.
Yeah. Well, and what you said earlier about going to an assessment and paying all the money and then not getting the diagnosis or having it be dismissed. Like, not that if you go seek out a diagnosis, you should get that diagnosis, but in the fact that like, was it dismissed? Was it negated for some reason? Did it not feel like it was taken serious? To be able to put so much into that and then not have it be a good experience, whether you get the diagnosis you're looking for or not, it can be really discouraging and really like cause somebody to go like kind of like back into themselves.
Because it's, one thing that a lot of neurodivergent people in general experience, but I know that autistic people tend to experience, even though this isn't like an official symptom, is rejection sensitivity. And so when you're like rejected for that diagnosis, it almost feels like you're being rejected for yourself.
Yeah.
Like it feels like the thing that you thought about yourself is just not true. And that sucks to hear. Because it leaves you with this unanswered question of, okay, why am I like this? Why am I struggling so hard? There has to be an answer somewhere.
Absolutely. And many of the people that I've seen have been looking into it for 2, 3, 4 years. They've been reading about it, watching things, doing the assessments. Like they've already become comfortable with that idea to then come in. And if somebody it's told no, it's like, well, then what is it? If it's not this, then what could it be? If we're not pinpointing something else that kind of anchors a lot of different things together, right? A lot of us are diagnosed with all of our symptoms before it gets to the core of it. And so we carry around all those symptom labels for a long time versus being able to identify, oh, my anxiety is here because I'm sensory overloaded all the time. Or like I'm depressed because I keep cycling through meltdowns and shutdowns and burnout. Like, how do we separate all of that out?
Lindsey, weren't you saying a couple of episodes ago that like when you and your partner would have arguments, you would have like these panic attacks that turned out to be like meltdowns?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't always arguments. It would just be, I would be in situations where it would turn into that because I could not communicate what was going on with me. And I would have these epic panic attacks. I'm using air quotes here, folks, that looked like temper tantrums, that looked like rage. And I cannot communicate in those. And so to the best of my ability, I would, scream, get away from me, or like, leave, right? And realizing that I was autistic meant that I now know those were meltdowns. And I've been able to, go back with family members, with my mom and be like, she knows, like I had rages a lot as a kid. And it was just like, oh, she's just really dramatic and emotional. And Lindsey's just very emotional and things. But yeah, I mean, again, people will be like, oh, well, every kid has a temper tantrum or whatever. And I'm like, okay, but I'm in high school. I'm in my early 20s and I'm still having those. And people I dated or I was roommates with, they experienced that and was like, that's not normal, right? But again, the only thing that I had been told in the past was like, oh, you have anxiety. Like, so it's a panic attack. And here's what you do. You do this breathing exercise. So, realizing that, oh, there's a reason why the typical panic attack methods were not working for me was huge, was absolutely life-changing, because now I know if I feel those feelings bubbling up, I can get out. I know a meltdown's coming, and it's not, I don't have to try to like count my breath, because that's not happening. That's not helping for me anyway.
I have a question for you though, because, this is, we're all three feminine presenting people. I know that myself and Lindsey identify as a woman. How often were you asked if you were on your period when you were having those extreme rage meltdowns?
Yeah, I'm sure people wrote it off as that. I mean,
yes,
especially as a teenager, I would say.
Yeah.
The doctors, anybody that my parents would have mentioned it to, that it absolutely was it. Again, I thought that was it. I just was like crazy hormonal at all ages. And so having answers like that then can change not only your mindset, but then you can look at different tools and different things to help you with those when you know it's a meltdown and not a panic attack. The language helps, I think. There's a lot of things now. Having a name for things makes it a little less scary in my experience, but also, getting the right tools now for what this really is. Because again, I had been given, here's all these tools, here's a booklet, here's something that you should do. And they didn't work. The different medications never worked for me. And now I know why.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just anxiety.
Yeah, I felt that too. Growing up, like I would have crying fits and I would like hyperventilate while crying. And I was just got to the point where I think I was in my 20s and I saw a new therapist and I was like, I cry all the time. Just ignore my tears. They don't mean anything. And she was like, let's pause on that. So now looking back, like I would just be crying, but those were meltdowns when I was a kid. But I was on depression medication for over a decade. And did it do something? Probably. Did it do enough? No, not to the same extent my ADHD medication has done. Like that took away my depression, and my anxiety is very situational now. Like the right medication really is important.
Yeah. I mean, and it's, for anybody who isn't aware, like ADHD and autism have a high comorbidity rate, which means that they go together a lot. They're two separate conditions, but the reason people tend to think like, oh, well, they must just be one thing is because there's such a high percentage of us who have both. And that can make it really confusing. I mean, that can make it confusing to try to get a diagnosis because usually one counteracts the other, or it makes your presentation look different than just autism or just ADHD. And so you might get no answers, or you might get diagnosed with one but not the other until a later date. And so I think it's awesome that you assess for both of them.
Yes, like that's absolutely true. We'll sit with people and be like, okay, does this fall into ADHD? Does it fall into autism? It can be explained by both. Or how are we looking at both presentations? Or how you said they might complement each other, but they can also exacerbate each other. And how does that interplay?
My ADHD and my autism are like two roommates who are fighting constantly in my brain over who can mess up my day more. And the loser is always me.
Yeah. It reminds me of those like the viral photos from years ago. I'm an elder millennial, so I have been on the internet since its inception.
The original memes.
The original memes, like our Let's Get Along shirt where there's two small children and they've been stuffed into this giant shirt and it was written on there. And it was like punishment. I feel a lot of the time like that is my ADHD and autism, where it's like they're fighting, but I'm like, no, you're gonna get along.
And then if you add like other comorbidities in on that, it's like, oh God, I didn't need a third one in here. Why? Can you just, can we all just get along and help this brain function so that I can just do my tasks for the day? But no, it's like, sometimes autism is like, okay, we're going to hyper-focus on this. But then ADHD is like, okay, but we can't hyper-focus on that. We're going to have executive dysfunction for that. So instead of doing the dishes, you're going to go and alphabetize your socks. And autism is just like, how are we going to alphabetize socks? How does that happen?
I didn't even catch that until you said it again. I was like, yeah, of course, alphabetize the socks.
Here just thinking about like the things that I like to sort. That like I
sorting
genuinely do. And that is calming for me. but I can't clean my own house, right? But if I'm at somebody else's house, or God forbid, like a workplace environment, I will sort office supplies. I will clean out those closets. I will like count all the markers and put them in order.
I think that's part of why it was missed for a lot of us, because in those work environments, we might be highly stimulated, especially if you're working in something you like, highly stimulated to where your desk is organized, it's clean, you're on top of it. So we're not seeing any of those like difficulties showing up in the work environment, so that it's showing up in all three areas of life, because we've got a perfectionistic piece with the work that we're doing there, or we're really liking sorting the office supplies.
And then we burn out because we will be that super employee, and I've got all my systems and I've got everything organized, and I want to please you, and then I'm missing work half the week because I am just physically, mentally, emotionally drained and exhausted, and then you either quit or you're fired for ghosting.
I did that in my BFA program, my first semester back after a long break for being broke. Turns out colleges kick you out for not having money. But my first semester being back, I was like, I'm going to be the perfect student. They kicked me out before. They're not going to have a reason to kick me out again because I'm going to be the best student. I'm going to get straight A's all semesters long. And I did it for the first semester I was back. And the second semester after that, I was dead. I was in such severe burnout. I barely scraped by getting like C pluses or B minuses because I'd worked myself to death.
Yep. I think that's incredibly common for neurodivergent folks, but I mean, especially with the autism and the ADHD combo platter, the ADHDers, is that we have, perfectionist tendencies, people-pleasing tendencies, all of those kinds of things. And those aren't a diagnostic criteria. That's just stuff that develops when you struggle with things growing up. You tend to, there's all sorts of different statistics out there. So I've heard, we are 20 times more likely to hear criticisms. I've heard we hear 12,000 more criticisms than, there's tons of numbers running around. But the point is that particularly autistic and ADHD kids hear a lot of criticisms. And so we end up with like the perfectionist tendencies, the people-pleasing stuff, and that carries into adulthood, and you cannot keep that up for long periods of time. It's impossible.
What I've heard going along with that is it doesn't even have to be a criticism. It can just be a demand or a request. And it can be interpreted as like, you just put your shoes on, where's your backpack, get your water bottle, meet me at the door. Like each one of those demands can feel like a strain on the system. It doesn't even have to be an explicit criticism to have an impact.
That's a good point, because I mean, that's something that is a hot topic right now in our community, is this demands and the concept of PDA, which some people refer to as persistent desire for autonomy, and some people call it pathological demand avoidance, and then some people are like, no, that doesn't exist at all. There's a lot of conversations going on about this right now. So, but there is a little nugget, I feel like, of truth and experience that we can see there. Like you said, when you feel like demands, you feel like you don't have control, somebody is always telling you what to do. And it may not be like a huge, demand. It's not like a military command. It could just be, like you said, like, grab your shoes, and that could set people off. Like, what's your experience with that, Jamie? I would love to know.
My personal experience with demand?
or just like, clinically, like, what? I don't know. I know it is a hot button topic for a lot of folks in our community. So I'm just curious.
It is real. I absolutely do. I think people experience it to different degrees. I have some clients that it's like a very big center point for us to get any clinical work done. And I have other clients where it's annoying. And so we can kind of gauge like what kinds of demands like feel like it's taking away autonomy and which ones are seeking out more independence. And so I think there's a lot of variability in our experiences, because I mean, that's what we're talking about. All of these things is there's such a vastness in how everybody experiences it. But I do think it's real. And I do think that there are ways that we do demand things of each other or are very, I think it's just a small language shift to be able to invite collaboration. That it doesn't have to be a demand, but it can be a, hey, let's all get ready to go. Let's all grab our shoes to get to the door.
Yeah.
There's just small language switches that take away that feeling of my autonomy being sacrificed. And I think that the switch is so easy that why not? And also for the person who has PDA or experiences that, how can we reinterpret some of the things, right? That could go along with some of the rejection sensitivity of how can we switch our understanding, our interpretation of a demand that's being placed.
I know for myself, when it comes to PDA, I know it's still a very new term. They're still doing studies on it, but a lot of autistic people and ADHD people do experience this. Yeah. And I know I've experienced some level of it for myself. What it winds up being is like whenever somebody makes a demand of me, that is something that, like, I don't want to say like normal adults are supposed to do, but like things that that like are required to function in a healthy manner. When people demand me to do those things for myself, it winds up like I reject it and like I get mad and anxious, not just because, you know, oh, how dare you ask me that, but for me it's like also a fuck now but for me it's also like a damn it. Now I am embarrassed because I should have known to do that. That's what everyone else knows how to do. And I'm now a bad adult because I didn't do that. Like brushing my teeth is a hard one because I experienced that aspect. And also at the same time, brushing my teeth is a very sensory nightmare experience.
Man, as soon as you mentioned brushing teeth, I'm like, I'm glad you guys aren't in the room with me. I haven't brushed my teeth in weeks. That is, I mean, these are the kinds of things, though, that when I was being assessed, these kinds of things that are embarrassing, I don't want anybody to know type of things were key components in unpacking the autism. It was these, you know, self-care tasks and things are very difficult for me. And again,
it's so hard. It's so hard to talk about them because like when you talk about them publicly, people will shame you. You know what I mean? Like, so how are we going to find ways to fix that if every time I talk about what I'm struggling with, people are like, oh, that's disgusting.
Yeah. And I'm like, at this point, you know, like, as I'm an old lady, so I'm just like, yep, I'm gross. But I know that there were times in my life, you know, where I tried to hide that struggle. I used all kinds of unhealthy coping skills. I think this is something that I've spoken with quite a few autistic folks about is, you know, using alcohol, using substances to help with our sensory experiences.
Yeah.
That we used a lot of things to dull sensory or, you know, sensory experiences that were too much for us. Or, you know, people got liquid courage, right? But it's different. I would say it's that intensity and frequency thing that we talk about when it comes to diagnoses and things like that is for autistic people. Yeah, it's more than just liquid courage. It's like liquid masking.
Sometimes it feels like a breath of fresh air. Oh, I don't have to tolerate all of that anymore. I can breathe because I'm not upholding the mask so firmly anymore.
The brain is no longer being stabbed as much by the music, so I can actually like talk to you in this social scenario, and anything awkward that I say could just be passed off as, well, I'm drunk. Don't worry about that. I'm not weird. I'm just drunk.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There were multiple times where I let that be the excuse, even though it wasn't true, is that I was so awkward. I was so off-putting. I did something that was so noticeably not neurotypical that absolutely they were like, was she drunk or was she, you know, whatever. And I would just be like, oh yeah, you know me. And that's actually, I think, how it started when I was younger as a teenager, was that became an easy excuse too, as well. You're right. And so I think pivoting off of that slightly is that when you do find out the reasons behind these behaviors, and you can then get healthier coping tools and, you know, maybe some ADHD medication and things like that. Wow. Is it so much better like to go through life, you know?
That's what I was thinking as you were saying that, is as I've unmasked or as I've lived more authentically, the less desire any substances have, because it's not so painful being in my skin, because I can be in my comfy home space with more ease. And I think that's where it comes back to like being assessed by somebody who is also autistic. We understand that nuance and we can ask about that nuance. And it's not going to be like, do you brush your teeth or not? Or do you overdrink? But it's like, what is it like when you drink? What is your sensory experience? How does that change? Right? Like having somebody who understands that experience is going to be able to pull out different information from somebody during that assessment.
I just think that when you get assessed and when you do have a diagnosis, you can look back and you can see all the different things that you were doing that relate to autism and stuff. Do you have anything? Because again, you did a self-diagnosis. You were like, I think I'm autistic and I'm a professional. I'll go see another professional. How did you go through your process? Like, what was your
so I got my ADHD diagnosis first, and then I kind of fell down the neurodivergent rabbit hole and started learning more and more. And I've been working with autistic clients my whole career, and was just like, I just really get them. I'm good at this. But then, right?
And then, it's literally you.
We're like, wow, I am so good at working with autistic folks. Like, just so good.
Wow. And then just started talking to other colleagues who were also going through the self-assessment process and being like, yeah, I think you're autistic. And they'd be like, no, I think you're autistic, or you're more of this than me. And so really like helping like peer review each other. And then I basically I'd been writing reports. So I wrote up my own report and then took it to my doctor and was like, so I think I'm autistic. And he's like, I would not guess that of you. Make your case. And so I made my case, and he was like, well, everything you described is autism. So sure. So it wasn't super official, but like, you know, like I had another professional say yes, but it wasn't a full like assessment process.
No, I've heard a lot of self-diagnosed people when looking for professional assessment, like a lot of them really will bring that big binder to the assessment. But a lot of people who are anti self-diagnosis, they'll say things like, oh, I don't want people watching 1 or 2 TikToks thinking that they're autistic and then getting an assessment. So I want to dispel that myth by asking an autism specialist, how often is that your experience when clients ask you about an autism assessment?
I have never had somebody watch 1 or 2 TikTok and then seek out an autism assessment. Everybody at minimum has been looking into this for a year. At minimum, usually 3 or 4 years, where they have been watching TikToks, they have been watching YouTube videos, they've read more autism books than I've read. They've listened to every single podcast, right? They have quotations from books that are highlighted or like dog-eared to show me the things that they relate to. So I had somebody come in and they had written like up 40 pages of notes. And I was like, you wrote your assessment already. What do you want me to do it? And they're like, I just want you to say that it's correct. And I was like, oh, I can do that. But so usually people are
that's what they're supposed to do.
Ample evidence and research, and it's never 1 or 2 videos. Sometimes if they've come in for a diagnosis, I'll be like, so you're asking ADHD, what about autism? They're like, yeah, I've seen some of those videos. And I'm like, how many of those videos? And they're like, a lot of those videos. And I'll be like, let's look into autism a little bit more. And then we'll like, in like that gap between the sessions, I'll have them read or look into specific autism things, and then we'll end up going with it as well.
We'll say though that yes, again, just nobody who's getting an adult autism assessment in all of our experience is just, you know, overnight from 2 TikToks. But I will say I have had professionals message me and tell me that they had people come into their office and send them or show them videos I made to be like, as part of their whole package. Yeah. Like that was some of the coolest like messages I've ever gotten, was like having therapists, having clinicians be like, by the way, you have been a part of the assessment process.
That's kind of like a really good validation of the work that you do, though, that like, you know, clinicians are receiving your videos from their clients and they're not like, oh my God, this is not autism. This is so wrong. But like having you be a legitimate part of the assessment process for people to be able to say correct things about autism, like that's such a validation of like that you've done so much work and that you've put in so much effort.
I mean, at the same time, I make a lot of jokes. Okay. I post so many memes. I make a lot of joke videos too. But I clarify, I always tell people like just identifying with what a meme or a joke, that means nothing. You know, I've said it, I quote my grandma all the time that everybody pees, but if you're doing it 40 times a day, like you might want to get it checked out. It's the frequency intensity all the time.
That's such a good one.
But yeah, everybody pees.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, I want to clarify too that like taking memes into your therapist is very different than to an assessment. Like if you've seen 1 or 2 or 5 videos and you take it to your weekly therapist and you want to discuss that, absolutely do that. Like you do not have to be looking into it for a year before you take it to your therapist. Like definitely discuss it then. But those aren't the people who are seeking out an assessment right away. So
yeah,
want to throw in that clarification.
For sure. But I think that's why it's, again, like it changed my life was, again, encountering folks who were going through what I was going through, encountering adult women who were autistic. That was like mind blowing for me. And so I think that's what a lot of people find is we think we're alone. We think I am just weird and abnormal and I just don't understand the rules of the world. And we internalize it. Like we've talked about before, have a lot of shame. And so finding something, whether it is a book, whether it's a video, whether it a random person you work with, finding somebody else who has those same experiences is so validating as a person to be like, I am not alone. And yeah. I think that is like the biggest reason that people are drawn to, you know, neurodivergent social media is that sense of community, is that like, I thought I was the only one.
You know, that's another reason why I personally, because, you know, a lot of people might not know this about me. I am an actor and I am also a screenwriter. And literally all of my projects have to do with autism in some sort of way, because for the longest time, social media has been the only accurate representation of autism that is easily accessible to everyone. Mm-hmm. Because other than like, for one, autistic projects with autistic people in them are very rare up until relatively recently. And even with relatively recently, they're still rare. We maybe get like 1 or 2 every other year or so, and they're never portrayed accurately. So it's not giving that same experience that autistic people do experience. Like it's not reaching out to autistic people to be like, hey, if you feel this way, you're valid. And undiagnosed people like, hey, if you feel this way, you have a community, which is why like I'm so passionate about writing about autism from the autistic experience, because it's like, I need other people to know, like, I'm weird. And if you're like me, we could be weird together.
Yes. We need all of that.
And so I think what you're doing, Jamie, is like so important, because to have an autistic person actually doing autism assessments and then teaching other professionals, that's huge too, because that's what blows my mind is the amount of medical professionals and clinicians and educators that have spoken to me privately. You know, they're like, keep me anonymous. Do not tell anyone. But I did not know about this. And I just went and looked up that study that you did a TikTok on. Like, I was misinformed.
My mind is always blown. Like, I've gotten into such a, like, an autistic bubble that when I meet other clinicians who aren't in this bubble, I'm like blown away by like the comments that they made or like the lack of information. And I'm just like, wait a second. Like, I thought we're not even at the basics right now.
Yeah. And so you do trainings for other professionals. How does that work?
Yeah. So most of my trainings are either for like organizations, like different organizations or group practices. So a group practice will bring me in and I'll train their entire staff. Or I just did one for like a whole healthcare organization, or I did one for our local chapter of therapists. So I'll come in and I'll do like an intro to ADHD and autism, and then kind of like those intro steps. But one of my projects that I'm working on right now is with NeuroCouple, is to create a space where we have content created by autistic clinicians about autistic therapy. And so that's where I have
I love that.
my trainings on doing assessments and really getting into those niches, right? Because we want to talk about the real specific stuff. Like, I don't want to stay at the intro level things. And so having a space where everybody's different, like, nuanced interests can have a place where we have just a catalog of all of these like neurodivergent affirming and informed trainings for how to make therapy more accessible and better and understand us.
I love that. And I think people are looking for that. They're seeking that. They want therapy. They want to talk to somebody, but they need it to be somebody who is knowledgeable and up to date okay, when it comes to neurodivergence. And so I think, having neuroaffirming practices is like such a game changer.
Especially as somebody who is female presenting, because I know I've heard so many therapists and assessors on TikTok, like on social media, straight up say that if they come across a woman who is trying to get an assessment, they will not give her an assessment. And I'm just like, that's blatant sexism.
Yeah.
And two, like, I'm sorry, it's your job to give an assessment if somebody is asking for it.
But you know what? If that's already their bias, then they shouldn't be giving them anyway. But like,
true.
Right? Like, if that's your bias, then why are you doing assessments? Because then you're not actually looking at the person in front of you.
No, you're not.
We have had our friend Alex on the show, who is a therapist. I can't ever say he's like Alexophosaurus or something. He has a dinosaur name on TikTok. He's gonna come at me for not knowing how to pronounce it. But he was telling us about ART therapy being like this amazing thing for his autistic clients. But again, like, his practice got there by being neuroaffirming, by, being neurodivergent and hiring other neurodivergent counselors and stuff. And so I think what you're doing is really, really cool, and we need more of it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love doing it. Yeah, we have a lot of fun in my group practice with all neurodivergent clinicians.
So, Jamie, you have one book or two books? I know that you've got books or books.
Yes, I have one book out and I am working on my second book. So my first book is Mindfulness for Teen Anxiety, and it is written for the teenager on introducing what mindfulness is, what anxiety is, and then it has like 45 activities. And it's not marketed towards neurodivergent teens, but because I'm neurodivergent and all of the teens I work with are, all of the activities are like super sensory based or super practical, or you can implement it immediately. And so it's really colorful too, and it's fun. And that was my first book.
So a lot of people might not know exactly what mindfulness is or what it looks like. Could you give us a quick explanation of what mindfulness is?
Yeah. So mindfulness is really like being mindful, being in the present moment, being in the here and now. A lot of times our anxiety leads us to being mindless, or like we might spiral out, or we might start ruminating, or we're doing something without intention of just watching a whole bunch of TikToks on repeat. And so that's mindless. So when we're being mindful, we're fully in the present. And in our current space. And so a lot of like the therapy tools around mindfulness have to do with somatic expression. So like using cold water to help regulate the nervous system, petting your animal so that that can help. I'm here right now. I'm petting my cat. She's purring. I can feel like the purr on her chest. I can feel her fur. That's bringing me back into the here and now. And it helps slow down the brain from the anxious spiral that it might be going down. And so it's mindfulness has started in Buddhist temples many, many centuries ago, and then has been co-opted by Western society and kind of been put into these therapy spaces. And there are some really cool tools and techniques that can be used of just kind of centering back into yourself, into your body, or into the room that you're at. Because sometimes our bodies aren't safe, but maybe the room we're in is safe. And so it's helping kind of reframe some of that.
When you say our bodies aren't safe, what do you mean by that?
I mean, sometimes like if somebody has an eating disorder, or if they have been assaulted, or they have gender dysphoria, the somatic work of being in your body may not feel safe because my body isn't comfortable and it doesn't feel safe, right? And so sometimes being outside of our body does feel more safe when the body we're in maybe doesn't match who we are.
Like if you're in a trauma response, sometimes your own body can trigger those trauma responses.
Absolutely.
So that sounds like a really beneficial book to help with people who have not experienced attempting mindfulness. And I really love that you did that.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think that would be easier for me to like outwardly focus, because a lot of the tips and tricks and things that I've folks have taught me before, is a lot of being in your body, like you said, where it's like, okay, focus on your feet and then focus on your breath. My problem is I was like, now that I'm focused on breathing, my brain goes to like, how do I breathe? Am I doing this right? Like,
literally.
Oh my God. And then I can't breathe
on my arm because I forget to breathe so much.
Twins!
Oh, you guys are matching. That's so cute.
We both have breathe tattoos on our wrists because that was an issue. I would like forget to breathe. Yeah. Sort of hyperventilating because I was overthinking it. So focusing on my dog and petting her and stuff, that would be a much better technique for me to use.
Right? Yes. So it's got a bunch of those fun activities. And I think just intuitively, because I wrote this book before my autism diagnosis, or kind of like when I was starting to explore it. And so I think there are a lot of things in it that I was just like innately doing that were supporting my sensory experience, but I was calling it mindfulness, but maybe it was just like helping regulate my sensory system.
Okay, that's cool. So what is the book that you're working on? What is that all about? I'm curious now.
So this one is I'm so excited about this. So working with teens has always been really fun because they have both the language of adults to talk about like really deep, like content, but especially adolescents, they still want to play. They'll do Connect Four, they'll do art in the therapy session and be talking about really big things. So I like that merging of still being playful and talking about really deep experiences. And so part of doing adult assessments now is because adolescent girls are not being diagnosed with autism at the rate, like, what is it, 20%? Only 20% of autistic women are diagnosed before age 18. So there's a lot of girls who are going through something or being diagnosed with other labels or just the symptoms instead of getting a neurodevelopmental assessment. And so the book that I'm working on writing right now, is on neurodiversity for teen girls. So talking about like the overarching umbrella of neurodiversity, so we can talk about also bipolar and OCD and ADHD and the sensory experience, so that it can get into the hands of adolescents who may not have access to a diagnosis yet, or may have been labeled with something else. And it'll kind of open the door to understanding whatever their neurotype is, and can kind of broaden that. So we don't go 10, 15, 20 years being labeled with different things or on medications that aren't right for us before we start to figure out that we're autistic.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I feel like, again, I'm so excited whenever I find out that a neurodivergent person is writing a book, because it's only been the last 5 years really that we're seeing that overwhelmingly books, that were written in the 90s and early 2000s, because I've tried to read through those and I'm like, this is not, accurate at all anymore. I'm like, oh, wow, that's a myth. But two, it's coming from like a place of purely clinical. It's written by doctors, or it's written by folks with a PhD at the end of their title, but it's not based on their life experiences. Or if it is, again, it is the experiences of a white man who was diagnosed as a child, and that is not the only part of the spectrum. That's not the only type of person.
No, I go into Barnes and Noble all the time to get books for research. I found 4 that are about autism by autistic people, about the autism experience. The rest are all like, oh, parenting your autistic child. My sister has autism. My cousin has that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, that's great, but not every autistic person is a parent of an autistic child. And what about the child's perspective? Like, not everyone is coming at this from a parent perspective.
That's so true. Yeah, and just like, we've had so many new books come out in the last couple of years, and I don't think they're widely distributed, right? Like, I agree. I don't see them on the shelves of Barnes and Noble. Like, they're only listed online, and so you have to know what you're looking for to go out and seek it. But how are we finding out about those books?
It's true. I mean, I would say it's word of mouth. It was like, I saw somebody else post that I'm friends with talk about, like, oh, I just read this book. So then I go look it up. But you're right. It's not widely spread. I'm not seeing New York Times bestsellers typically that are from autistic authors talking about the autistic experience. There's one, I think it's self-published. A lot of them are also self-published. That's been my experiences. We have a lot of friends who are putting it out there because, again, like, it's maybe, I don't want to say like an us versus them thing, because it's not that, but I would say the neurotypical population is not, chomping at the bit to get a hold of these books, but like the neurodivergent population, we really want to learn more about ourselves and our communities.
Because they haven't a lot of these books haven't been published before, that there's not the data on how much they will be bought or sold. Like, like the money finance piece of it about, will these be bought? What is the actual need for it to be able to invest and put those books out there? So,
I really think, again, not to take this back to, like filmmaking and acting and things like that. However, I do think that when more autistic actors become mainstream performers where people are seeing them more often, I do think that kind of stuff will help those kinds of books appear more on the shelves. Because, when you hear a lot from larger name people about disability, like on the mainstream, we see it in films, we see it in television shows, more than The Good Doctor.
The Good Doctor is bad representation.
Yes, it is.
Good Doctor, bad representation.
Exactly. The Bad Doctor. But like, I think when we see more legitimate representation of autism in film and television, I think that will solve that problem. Because if we can get one autistic person to be like an actual celebrity, that kind of like their autobiography would fly off the shelves.
Yeah. I will say there are 2. So Chloe Hayden has a book about her autism experience, and Fern Brady, who is well known in the UK, she has a book out. And again, those, I think were published through a larger publishing house.
We love to see it.
Well, because they're famous, actresses or comedians, TV personalities. So I think you're right. I would like to see, average everyday autistics be able to get published. And because again, like, it's great to see representation. We need more, but that needs to be across the board, like we need it. in the workplace. We need it on television. We need it everywhere.
Like, how many stories we hear of autistics having emotional relationships with characters that they have on screen or with their fandoms, right? And so I think having the representation there, it mirrors and it goes back and forth to have it is a dual relationship, or there's a duality to it.
Yeah, when people are like, well, autistic teenage girls don't exist, I'm like, have you been to Tumblr? I beg to differ. Okay.
You know, something that Lindsey and I said in an earlier episode, I'm going to reiterate it here. If you were on Tumblr and you wrote Harry Potter fan fiction, if you haven't been assessed yet, you might want to look into that now.
Yep. If you are a prolific writer of Sherlock Holmes fanfics,
oh my God,
you might want to go look into an autism assessment
a little bit, just
maybe.
A little bit. Go take a look.
But I don't want to say, that's where autistic teens are hiding. But yeah, you're definitely right. I think in the fandoms, finding that special interest, and that's where you can find some community and socialize and stuff, is because, I think that is where I found acceptance, was in the geek community. And so I was doing the convention scene and cosplay and stuff. That's actually the kind of content I made before I was Brains and Spoons. Anecdotally, unofficially, I would say the majority of your con goers, neurodivergent, like on the spectrum, just so many.
Yeah. I would probably agree with that.
Yeah. But again, it's because it is a safe place. It is an okay place to not follow societal norms, to not go by neurotypical rules, and to be able to info dump, to be able to be really, really into something obscure and nobody think that you're super weird because of it.
I really wish that that my mom had allowed me to do self-defense classes when I was younger, because when I was a kid, everyone was taking karate. That was what everyone was doing. I still recommend that for parents of autistic kids. I always tell them, try putting your autistic child in some sort of disciplinary movement scenario, where they are learning those things, because that can also help. A lot of autistic people experience a separation from their own bodies, a disconnect, and a lot of autistic people suffer with things like dyspraxia. And doing sports or some sort of self-defense, physical movement, that can really help autistic kids learn their body, especially if they're doing it from a young age. And that can help so much over time with fine motor skills.
Absolutely.
Martial arts is a great place for autistic kids to learn body control and movement control skills, and things that are group activities that don't cut people from the team, right? Something that is not going to be that competitive. Running, swimming, those types of things where the more is better. And so you still get that structure, you still get the routine, you still get that camaraderie, and like you said, an understandable who's in charge and what your role is, without the rejection of being cut from field hockey.
That's the aspect that I like when it comes to martial arts. That's the aspect that I like most about particularly Krav Maga. I take Krav Maga. It's a lot of fun. But I know that a lot of other martial arts, my partner is a multi-tier black belt in karate. And he said that in his experience with karate, it was very focused on competition. It was very focused on building your skills up so that you could compete and win these sort of things. Whereas Krav Maga is more about we really don't care if you compete with people. This is not about winning a fight. This is about self-defense, to the point where if something happens, you make it out of there alive. That's the whole basis of it. But I also like Krav Maga as an autistic person, because there are certain times where you're in a Krav Maga class where they just tell you to take what's called a tombstone pad. It's like a little, like almost like a half circle punching pad that's like about this big. And they just tell you to sit on top of it and pound into it as hard as you can. And I think that that's a good coping skill for autistic people to take home. I actually wound up getting my own tombstone pad for my house. And when I'm going through a meltdown, I can just get on top of that thing and just pound into it to really get that aggression out.
That sounds really fun, actually.
It's so fun.
Yeah, I like that. So I feel like getting an assessment doesn't have to be as daunting as we might think, because hopefully there are more neurodiversity affirming therapists out there, or who are being trained right now. So I am so excited about that. Jamie, if folks want to learn more about you, your practice, your books, where can they find that out?
Absolutely. So I am neurodivergent therapist on every social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all of them. You can find me there. My group practice is Equilibrium Counseling Services in California. And if you're a clinician wanting to get trained, NeuroPebble, or neuropebble.com is where you can find more trainings.
Yay. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You can find me at Brains and Spoons everywhere.
And you can find me at Ribera Bonbon everywhere. Yes, it is a complicated name. No, I can't change it.
And like always, please press all of the buttons, like, subscribe, comment. I don't know what else is on the screen. All right.
Most professional podcasters.
Fantastic experience.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.